Very happy to join your forum. Unfortunately, I was not able to do it in person for security reasons, which also reminds us that democracy is not a given. We have to fight for it. And I'm sure people in Hungary must know this in a lot of detail. Just a few thoughts on the prospects of Russia becoming democratic. I know that there are polarized views and a lot of negativity and skepticism on this across Europe and the world. Just a few thoughts. First, I think this discussion is filled in a lot of ways with polarized extremes, because some people have a lot of rosy hopes for a potential democratization of Russia and my country quickly becoming a normal democratic state. I think there was a lot of this unnecessary calm and wishful thinking back in the 1990s when we got a chance to follow our most recent democratic experiment. A lot of people said, well, this is not Soviet Union anymore, so things are going to somehow settle down by themselves. And much according to Francis Fukuyama, Russia would just become a normal democracy by click of a fingers, and that will be it. There is, on the contrary, particularly recently, a strong wave of skepticism with a lot of people saying that Russia might never become a democracy because Russians are special people. I don't know, I'm not aware of any academic biological research about Russians being some special species of people inclined towards authoritarianism and Tsarism, dictatorship, and so on. What I do know, if you look back at the Russian history, is that whenever the extreme repression and the pressure from the central government was easing, Russia was always leaning towards becoming a democratic state, demanding constitution, free elections, universal rights, parliament, and so on, be it, I don't know, 1825 or 1917 when we had the first democratic parliamentary elections in the country, where actually women were given electoral rights before countries like United States of America and some others. We can recall the periods after Stalin's death, followed by Khrushchev thaw, or the death of Brezhnev and Andropov, followed by Gorbachev's perestroika. Actually, Russian history, to make the long story short, would always suggest that whenever the pressure from extreme repressive regime is easing, Russians are always leaning towards basically the same thing as people across the world. And I myself have been to many authoritarian countries, including China, Central Asia, Middle East, and others. And when you talk to people and scratch the surface, you always hear that people want accountable government. People want to have a say in politics and not being punished for what they are saying. People want rule of law and independent judiciary. And they're actually, you know, they might have portraits of their authoritarian leaders hanging on their walls, but they're not happy with a system that is not providing them with basic rights and freedoms. Russia is no exception. If you actually look across the country and what happened in the past quarter of a century, what you would see is that there was never an acceptance of Vladimir Putin's attempts to abolish direct elections of regional governors, city mayors, heads of districts, members of parliament, and so on. Across these years, there was a healthy two-thirds majority which always supported a comeback to direct elections without any filters and censorship of candidates, which were abolished by Putin years ago. You would see an extremely low turnout at the totally controlled and staged election campaigns, with a voter turnout significantly surging whenever you really had something resemblant of a true political competition with an unknown and unpredictable political outcome. You had massive protest rallies. I think even many Russian skeptics in the West know the word Khabarovsk, where 4 years ago, that's a fairly provincial region. We're very far from Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's actually located in the Far East. but well over 100,000 of regional residents actually went out to the streets protesting against arrest of a democratically elected governor representing not the incumbent ruling party, but one of the parties that, pretend to be in the opposition. So basically, these were people out in the streets supporting, wresting the power away from the ruling party monopoly. If you look across the board, there are plenty of examples like that. What we don't see in Russia are mass rallies or movement or parties which actually call for abolishing democratic institutions. Even Vladimir Putin's regime spends a lot of money, a lot of resources, and here's a hint. If you really want to know what Putin fears most, look at the resources he spends on combating some of the adversaries, narratives, and so on. Putin spends enormous resources to maintain a democratic facade. Even the ruling United Russia Party, again, spends major resources pretending to hold a party primary to choose the candidates from from an array of different participants who pretend to be competing with each other. Massive amounts of money are being spent on that to just maintain a facade that we still have some sort of democracy. There was never a party, never a movement, never a mass political rally which said, let's scrap it, let's abolish democracy and become absolute monarchy, which Russia de facto is at the moment. Moreover, when some people said it, and I mean, there are hotheads within Putin's entourage and some of the ideologies of this regime who from time to time say democracy is, some Western invention which has no relevance to Russia. Let's abolish it. Let's come back to the, the total absolute monarchy style system of governance. This does not catch up with the Russian society. They are becoming fiercely criticized for even saying this, which means, bottom line, there are very strong democratic instincts within the Russian population, which even the quarter of a century of Putinism was not able to kill. Another issue, if you go back 20 years before Putin established total control over national television, what you would see would be opinion polls where predominant majority of the Russian people would have negative opinion of Joseph Stalin, instead having positive opinion of the United States of America. I recall like 2002, 2003, it was around 65–70% of Russians positively perceived the US. When Vladimir Putin went to Rome in May 2002 to sign the Rome Declaration on cooperation with NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that was supported by 65% of the Russians, 35% at the same time. That's official figures. I might send you links. 35% of Russians wanted to apply for NATO membership at the time. What happened later obviously has to do with propaganda. Imagine yourselves being locked in one room for 23 years. That's the time that has passed since Putin's takeover of the last major federal television channel. Being locked in one room for 23 years with one television set telling you these propaganda narratives. What are the chances that you would come out of this room repeating all this stuff? I'd say they would be quite high. Basically, when we speak about some Russian opinion pollings and other things reflecting public opinion, we should be mindful of that, of the poisonous decades of, I would say, sometimes very clever propaganda narratives. I heard some of the previous discussions, and we see that even within the European Union, some of the anti-democratic, archaic narratives are basically taking a hold. Because a lot of people really are mindful and fearful of certain threats to their traditional lifestyle presented by rapid globalization. So there is a backlash. Autocrats across the globe, exploit that pretty well and pretty skillfully. So bottom line, I would say that there is a very strong, however raw, but pretty strong basic demand for freedoms, accountability of the government, rule of law, and democratic institutions across Russia. Is it like a classic demand for liberal democracy by the book? I wouldn't say so. I mean, is what we have in other democratic countries, is it always a predominant popular demand for liberal democracy by the book? I doubt that as well. So Russia is hardly any different in this regard. But that was the upside. The downside is that the decades and centuries of totalitarian style of governance, propaganda, and brutal oppression of the population has taken a toll, which means that Russia's road to democracy will be rocky and bumpy. It will never be easy. What is important here to understand is that if Russia will not become a normal, modern, democratic state, there will always be a chance for the consolidation of some sort of autocratic regimes which would tend to be aggressive. That means that we Russian Democrats see as our mission to use every opportunity possible, however difficult this might be, to actually try our best to wake up these democratic instincts in the society, to explain to the people that democracy works, however difficult and challenging this might be. And we do believe that there is a future for our country associated with that. Only becoming democratic, operating and working in accordance with the rule of law and respecting international norms and renouncing Russia's imperialism, Russia might become a responsible international player. No democracy, no guarantee that Russia will never behave aggressively again. Most likely it will if it's going to remain an autocratic state. So we see it more as a chance, as an opportunity, not as a given. Democracy is never a given. You have to fight for it every day. Even in the democratic countries, there's always a risk for backsliding, and we know it. Particularly, I'm speaking to the conference held in Budapest, Hungary. We have to fight for democracy every day. Might not be easy, particularly in the case of Russia, which is, really one of the backyard countries in terms of global democratic progress. No denial of that. It's going to be difficult to take Russia out of that pit, but I have just outlined to you some figures and some facts which I think give some room for optimism in this regard. And yes, we would need help from international community. I can recall some of the times of our democratic experiment back 30, 20 years ago, when a lot of Russians really felt behind. Like, yes, the West, congratulated us with some hugs and kisses after the peaceful dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, but that was it. We barely received any help and any assistance. This time, I think it should be different to make it succeed and not provoke any resentment, which autocrats of the future will be exploiting. So that's a pretty serious conversation for all of us. I will conclude with simply saying that talking about Russia never becoming a democracy first is against the basic instincts and aspirations of the Russian population. And second, it's pretty dangerous because autocratic Russia will always be dangerous and aggressive. The only way we can proceed forward with making Russia a peaceful and responsible international player is by democratizing it, and it is difficult, but it is possible. And we can really look at the Russian population as an ally in this regard, not some sort of adversary which is genetically incompatible with freedom. That's not true. That's not the case. There is a big demand for freedom among the Russian people, and we're actually working to make this major engine of democratizing our country in the future, however difficult that might be. I would stop here. If our format involves questions, we'll be happy to answer them.